Hello folks, it's the PSGS again. Welcome to another one of my videos. In this one I'm going to look at some photographs of KHCT buses, in other words Kingston upon Hull City Transport, both with them and with subsequent operators. This hopefully will be the first of 2 or 3 parts. I've just bought a load of slides online, complete with copyright, and I need to get them printed off. In this first bit I'm going to look at some photographs, mainly that I've taken of KHCT buses. And I'll talk a bit about them, what they show, where the buses went, things like that. So we'll crack on, and we're starting not with a photograph but with a compliment slip. In about 1990 my dad spoke to somebody he knew that worked for KHCT regarding getting some official photographs of the Iveco minibuses that they ran. We'll see some of those later on. I was quite obsessed with those. I did get 3 photographs from them along with this compliment slip, and unfortunately I don't have the photographs anymore. But as you can see, I've kept the compliment slip. It's a nice memento of KHCT, and I'm pleased to have it in my collection. So when I was a kid growing up in Hull in the 1980s, the oldest buses in service with KHCT were Leyland Atlanteans with row bodies. The very oldest of them look like this. This is the former 244, standing next to the former 246. They were both new to Hull Corporation in December 1968. Some of these buses lasted until 1994. These 2 were withdrawn in 1990 and sold to the local independent operator Connor and Graham of Easington near Witherinsea. In 1994 they were bought by East Yorkshire, and these 2 found themselves with East Yorkshire as 871 and 872 respectively. As you can see, 872, the former 246, was repainted into East Yorkshire's livery, whereas 871 retained its Connor and Graham livery. They were withdrawn after about 5 years. In 1999 they both passed into preservation. They're seen here in 1999 in the early preservation days, an open day at the Stagecoach Kingston upon Hull garage at Foster Street that was staged to mark 100 years of municipal transport in Hull. KHCT were the council bus operation of Hull City Council. In 1986 they were set up as an arm's length company, as required by the Transport Act 1985. In other words, it was run like a commercial company. It had to make a profit, but all the shares were still owned by the council. In December 1993 they sold it to a consortium of Cleveland Transit, who bought 51%, and KHCT's employees, who bought the other 49%. And so it was privatised then in December 1993. In November 1994 Stagecoach bought Cleveland Transit, and they also bought the 49% shares of the KHCT employees. So KHCT became part of Stagecoach, and it became Stagecoach Kingston upon Hull. So as I said, both of these passed into preservation, as seen here. 244 is still preserved. It's not active at the moment. It's shown as sewn on the DVLA website. Hopefully it's safely stored somewhere and undergoing restoration. 246 wasn't quite as lucky. It was sold to PVS of Carlton in the around 2009, somewhere around there I think. I believe it's still there. I've seen videos on YouTube done quite recently where it's still standing there, albeit in a rather forlorn state. I don't know if it's actually savable now. It might be too far gone, but hopefully somebody will fish it out one day and perhaps do it up. When new, these had this unusual windscreen. It was single piece. 244 at some point has been fitted with a split windscreen. Now I thought, obviously as a kid growing up in Hull, that everybody's Atlanteans looked like this, but apparently they didn't. Sunderland had some Daimler Fleet lines that had a similar windscreen, and T7 and Sons of Dunscroft near Doncaster had a bus that had the same windscreen. But yeah, apart from that, I think they were more or less unique. As I say, I thought everyone's looked like that. It was quite a shock to find out they didn't. For the 1970 deliveries, KHCT stuck with row-bodied Atlanteans, but they went for a more updated design. The initial couple of batches had dual door bodies, as seen here on 275 TKH 275H. Unfortunately, in March 1987, this bus was on an early morning journey from Wymersley Road in West Hull to the city centre. It was passing along Calvert Lane. It skidded on a patch of black ice, crossed the pavement and hit the abutment of a disused railway bridge, resulting in the damage you can see here. This isn't my photo, it's one from my collection. I'm not quite sure who the original photographer was on this one. Even more unfortunately, this bus was earmarked for preservation. It had been promised to a preservationist group, but obviously that didn't happen. It was scrapped instead. One feature they did have, these buses, was this, in vogue at the time, large panoramic window at the back of the upper deck. That was on both batches of the dual door buses and also on the first batches of the single door ones that followed them. The dual door buses were christened sidewinders in Hull. They were named after the trawlers that pulled the nets over the side. So yeah, they were called sidewinders by one and all. So after 2 batches of dual door buses, they went for single door. This is one of the later ones with the more conventional upstairs rear windows there. There's actually 2 in this shot. You've got 349 on the left, NAT 349M, and 354 NAT 354M. So this was taken after the Cleveland Transit takeover. Cleveland introduced a blue-based version of its livery. Its livery was basically green, white and yellow in the proportions you can see on the bus there. They painted as many buses as they could into the new livery, using a brighter blue than KHCT had used before. They also used up old stocks of paint to try and smarten up some of the other buses. So 349 had a lower deck repaint, resulting in this quite unique 3/4 white livery. As you can see by the back of the Scania standing in front of it, the fleet had become quite scruffy by this point. In 1992 a bus war broke out in Hull between East Yorkshire, who registered on a lot of the KHCT routes, and KHCT, who did counter registrations on a lot of East Yorkshire routes. Various independents weighed in as well, and it was quite a bloody battle. One of the effects on KHCT was there wasn't any money for fleet upkeep, so what had been a really smart fleet became quite scruffy. Cleveland Transit did the best to smarten them up as much as they could. Now in 1989 KHCT had bought David Costa buses, who traded as CityLink, and they kept the name for a low cost unit. They used old sort of superannuated vehicles, and I think the drivers were paid less than the main KHCT drivers, but the idea was they could win contracts at a lower tendering price than KHCT themselves could manage. So it was run as a low cost unit. The buses were painted in a 3-tone green colour. We'll see a few of them in the background of various of the photos that are coming up. In 1990 some Atlanteans were painted in an all over white livery, including these 2, 349 and 354. It was known initially as the Contract Services livery, and the first repaints had dual fleet names. They had CityLink on the front and KHCT on the side, and the idea was if they won contracts at short notice they could just enter service with whichever subsidiary had won the contract with the relevant operator's disc on them. In practice they spent a lot of the time on normal service. As the CityLink fleet itself got older and perhaps less reliable, they tended to appear on the CityLink routes, the 643, 644, I think there was a 614 as well at one time. And they also appeared on normal KHCT routes. I particularly remember seeing them on the 10 to North Brandsome via Cleveland Street. That might have been deliberate because that had composition from Metro City Bus, who used a largely white-based livery. So these 2 had been all over white. 349, as I say, received a blue lower deck to result in this unique livery. 354 received the Cleveland Transit livery. I don't think it was a full repaint. I think they just painted the blue and the yellow onto the base white colour, but it looked very good indeed. Unfortunately, it didn't operate for very long in its repainted form. It was sold along with 349 in May 1994. 354 initially went to Frank Poppleton of Pontefract. It finished up back in Hull with the late Jim Houghton. At the time he traded as City Central and Corporation Transport, and it remained with him when he reconstituted his business as Ellie Rose. It passed into preservation, as did 349, and they both, as far as I know, exist to this day. Again, they're not active. I hope they're stored safely somewhere undergoing restoration and that we see them again soon, but they're both still in existence apparently. They're still shown as shown on the DVLA website, so again, hopefully they will emerge at some point and we'll be able to enjoy them both again. So we'll look quickly at a couple of the Atlanteans with subsequent operators. A lot of the Hull Atlanteans were sold to Fylde Borough Transport, formerly known as Lytham St Anne's. Fylde were taken over later on by Blackpool Transport. So Fylde bought 314 ARH 314K. Again, it's one of the early single door ones, retaining the big panoramic window at the rear of the upper deck. As I say, Fylde were bought by Blackpool Transport, and this is in Blackpool Transport days, running with Blackpool and the Fylde Blue Buses fleet names on Blackpool Seafront, on its way to Stargate on the Promenade service. As you can see by the notice on the front, they were often used on school services as well. And then a later bus, this used to be 327 DRH 327L. By the time I photographed it at Fleetwood Tram Sunday in, I think, 1998, it was Blackpool Transport's 492. It had been sold by KHCT to Fylde Borough, and again it had passed to Blackpool when they took Fylde over. It received a dateless Northern Ireland registration to try and hide its age a bit. Not really successfully by this point. It does look a bit worn in places. If I just zoom in, you can see part of the notice from the Hull days there as well. Please have exact fare ready. Above that would have been another one saying operator has no change, from the days when Hull buses ran with fare boxes. You needed the exact fare to put into them. So in the mid-70s, Hull moved on from buying Atlanteans, and they bought 3 batches of Metro Scania Metropolitans. If you've watched my review of the Britbus models, you'll know it's my all-time favourite bus, particularly in a Hull livery. They were all withdrawn early on in 1986. Deregulation happened in October 1986. KHCT decided to register their new network earlier on in 1986 with the idea that the passengers would be used to it at the point where everybody else was changing theirs. And they managed to withdraw a lot of buses. Some sources state it was because of massive service cuts, but it wasn't really. The new network was basically the old network renumbered. So, for example, Route 73 became Route 1, Route 63 became Route 2, etc. How they did manage to achieve the reduction in the fleet was that they reduced the number of spare vehicles to normal levels. There was a joke among East Yorkshire drivers that there were more corporation buses parked up in the depots on a Friday tea time than there were out on service, and that might have been an exaggeration, but it wasn't that far from the truth. They had an awful lot of spare buses for the size of the operation, and they just cut it to normal levels, which enabled them to withdraw all 36 of the Metropolitans in one go. They were stored initially on the parking area next to Hull bus station that was known as the Muck, and then they were moved to undercover storage later on in 1986 at Holderness Road Depot. When the new services came in earlier on in 1986, Holderness Road and Cottingham Road garages were closed. Holderness Road was used as a store, as initially was Cottingham Road. Cottingham Road reopened for the school term in September 1986, and a few of the Metropolitans were reinstated for schools services. They won quite a lot of schools contracts. And Cottingham Road had a slightly strange existence. They moved the Kingstonian coach fleet there for a bit. They used it for some of the Iveco minibuses that you can see one next to the Metropolitan here. They ran a service from Cottingham Road to the Bransholme estate and also Bransholme Shoppers services, and the minibuses for those were based there. They used it for school buses, so the schools fleet were based there, and they also used it for vehicle storage. When CityLink was taken over in 1989, they also used it as the operational base for CityLink, and it closed in, I think, 1992 for the second and final time. So some of the Metropolitans, as we said, were reinstated in September 1986, including this one, 401 GAG 401N. It's a terribly grainy shot. I'm sorry about that. I did have a very basic 135 camera back then, which took rather dodgy shots, as you can see. Part next to it is one of the Atlanteans they bought from West Yorkshire Passenger Transport Executive for the schools contracts. They were long wheelbase, so they had more seats than the native ones. As I say, next to it's one of the Ivecos for the Bransholme services, and then there's some Atlanteans in the background. They may have been in the schools fleet, or they may have been stored, or mothballed as KHCT referred to it. I think this photo was taken in early 1987 if I remember correctly. It may have been late 86. The Metropolitans were withdrawn again in early 1987, the handful that had been reinstated, and then they were sold on to other owners. So as I mentioned, the Metropolitans were stored initially on the parking area near the bus station called the Muck. It was called that because it had this rather basic surface which was mucky, hence the Muck. In summer 1986 they were all driven one Saturday from there to Holderness Road Garage for undercover storage, and this is 403 GAG 403N just making its way off the Muck to go to Holderness Road. This bus eventually finished up with Black Prince of Morley, but it suffered a major engine failure not long after arrival, and it was scrapped. The registration plate did survive on the Jaguar car of the owner, the late Brian Crowther. And I was very surprised in the early 2000s. I stood at a bus stop in Morley and this Jaguar car drove past with JAG 403N on it. So yeah, it was quite a shock to see that. So the registration plate may still survive even if the bus doesn't. And this is a photo taken in spring 1986 of the Metropolitan stored on the muck. The nearest one is 412 KRH 412P. I think the other one's 413. You could identify it on the original photo. This is a printout. I've got the photo saved on the computer. So yeah, they were all parked there. This is another dubious shot. I hadn't even got the 135 camera at this point. I'd got a box brownie of unknown origin that had just appeared in a cupboard one day. And it took rather dubious shots, as you can see. But for historical value, it's well worth looking at. This is another shot of the buses being driven from the muck to Holderness Road. You wouldn't be able to do this nowadays. 415 KRH 415P, as you can see, had been withdrawn after a road traffic collision where it had smashed its front in and broken the near side half of the windscreen. Despite that damage, it was being driven as normal down to Holderness Road. Obviously nowadays you'd have to put it on tow. But yeah, you can just about see a notice in the window of the nearest, the bus next to it. That would say unfit for service or stopped unfit for service. The reason for that, some of the buses that were parked around the Metropolitans were actually still in use. So it was just to stop a driver from taking one of them out in service. 415 had actually had one of the notices put on it. I think it had been taken off. In fact, no, that might even be it there. But yeah, it seems really strange to put it on there. Obviously, no driver is going to take a bus out with half a windscreen, but yeah, it did have one at one point. You can see on the Metropolitans and various other buses that I've shown you the typical Hull advertising above the destination blind. The telephones are almost for Hull City Council's own telephone service. Even today, Hull has its own telephone service. It's now Kingston Communications, or KC for short. So when they finished buying Metropolitans, they went on to buy MCW Metro buses. They bought 30 of those as well, in two batches of 15. This is one of the ones from the second batch, 520, SAG 520W. You can see from the name on the front, it's in Stagecoach ownership. This photo was taken in 1997 when Stagecoach bought the shares of the employees of KHCT. One of the conditions of purchase was they had to use the blue livery for 2 years after purchase. So that had expired in November 1996, that agreement. However, some of the older buses that were due for withdrawal, such as the Metro buses, were never repainted into Stagecoach livery. They just retained the blue livery until the end of the service life. So another shot from 1997 of 522 SAG 522W. Just making a turn at Monument Bridge in Hull City Centre there on a 2 to the Boothbury estate. You can almost hear the retarder howling as the bus stops there. So after the Metro buses, Hull had actually ordered 10 Leyland Titans. Unfortunately, the Titan was beset with delays, and eventually Leyland said they couldn't fulfil the order. They sold 15 Atlanteans to Hull in their place. They were similar to the earlier ones, except they had a higher driving position and they had maquette seats as well. Unfortunately, I've not got a photo of one of those batches in this lot. I have got one in the slides that I bought. So if you tune in to part 2 of this series, I'll hopefully have one there to show you. After that, they went off Leyland, understandably, and they went to buy Dennis Dominators. The first 10 had Alexander bodies, and then after that they went on to East Lancashire. This is one of these Lancashire ones, 135E135SAT, which in 1989 was painted in the old Streamline livery that was used up to 1972. That was to commemorate the 90th anniversary of municipal transport in Hull. You can see behind it is an Atlantean of CityLink in the CityLink low-cost operation livery. And behind that there's a Connor and Graham, ex-Manchester, either Fleetline or Atlantean. The location is Holderness Road in East Hull, just coming up to the Mount Pleasant junction. If you study the photograph carefully, you can make out that the CityLink bus is C1, which was 281 in the main fleet, WRH 281J. 135 was one of 3 Dennis Dominators that were painted in traditional liveries to mark the 90th anniversary. The others were 136, which was done in the 1931 blue and white motorbus livery, and 137, which was in the maroon and cream City of Hull tramways livery. Incidentally, this isn't one of my photographs, it's by Mickey Collins. It's used under the Wikimedia Commons licence for resharing. So the first 3 East Lancashire Dominators, 111, 112, 113, were fitted with the sort of normal East Lancashire body of the period. All angled windows and things, as you can see here on the former 112 in its subsequent life, with Northern Blue of Burnley. As you can see, they hadn't repainted it. It retains the Cleveland Transit era KHCT livery. When these buses were new, they were delivered in the Kingstonian coach livery of white with blue and maroon bands, and they had coach seating, and they were mainly used on private hires. They did appear on normal service as well. Later on in life, 2 of them, 111 and 112, were reseated with bus seats, as you can see here. They were taken out of old Atlantean buses, you can see by the sort of arched shape that they're old seats from Atlanteans. So yeah, this is 112C, 112CAT, and it's setting off from Halifax bus station on its way back to Burnley during the brief era that Northern Blue ran on the Halifax to Burnley route. The rest of the East Lancashire Dominators, as we've already seen with 135, had basically a knockoff of the Alexander R-Type. It was a copy of it. There were some detailed differences, which we'll see as we go through. In this lineup on the Isle of Man at Douglas Depot, there's the former 120 C120CAT, which by this point was Isle of Man Transport 49 CMN 49T. 4 of them were sold to the Isle of Man in 1993. They stayed there till about 2000, and then they went off to Ensign of Purfleet, a dealer, and the subsequent history, if there was any, doesn't seem to have been recorded. 120 had quite an interesting start to its life. When it was still very new in 1986, it was stolen by a joyrider who eventually lost control and crashed it at the junction of Springbank West and Chantlands Avenue, and it had to go back to East Lancashire for repair because it was quite badly damaged. Another photo from the Isle of Man, this one taken at Port Erin Depot in September 1998 of Isle of Man 52 CMN 52T. This was 127 with KHCT C127CAT. There's another one of the same batch standing next to it, but I didn't record, unfortunately, which one that was. So again, I've not got a photo of an Alexander one. There are some in the slides that I've bought. So again, in the second part of this series, I will show you an Alexander. Some of the detail differences: the East Lancashire bodies, they had the standard East Lancashire driver's signalling window, and also the upper deck rear window was closer to the rear corner than on the Alexander one. And they also had quite a crude grille compared to the Alexander one. They never quite had the style of it. This is one of the last Dominators that Hull bought. It was originally 153 F153 HAT. When Stagecoach took over, they renumbered the fleet, so it was in a common series with Cleveland Transit, and it became 253. The F-registered vehicles, there were 2 batches of them, 142 to 151, F142 to 151 BKH, and then 152 to 157, F152 to 157 HAT. So there's 153, F153 HAT. They had Cummins engines. The earlier ones had Gardner engines. The F-registered ones had Cummins, which were higher revving, so they sounded much different to the earlier Dominators. The HAT batch, when they were new, had the 3 Crowns logo that we saw on the complement slip. I'll just quickly zoom it into the shot there. There we go. So they had that on the seat maquette. Now, when it was privatised in December 1993, the City Council gave the new owners 3 years to remove the logo because it was the City Council's logo. Obviously, they had to take it off the outside of the buses straight away, but from the inside of the buses, they had 3 years to do it because it obviously takes longer to recover the seats. So as you can see, this one's had its seats recovered in a nondescript red-based maquette. And this is the final Dominator that was supplied to KHCT, the former 157F 157HAT. It became 257 with Stagecoach. As you can see, it's had its seats recovered in Stagecoach standard maquette. In 1999, it was withdrawn and sold along with several others to Houston Ram of Sudden near Rochdale, who was a dealer and an operator, and they had an operation at the time called the Coachmasters, which it entered service with mainly on school contracts, hence the yellow livery. The Coachmasters were bought out by First in 2000, and this bus passed to First Manchester's schools operation as 30266, as you see it here. In this shot, which I think was taken about 2002-2003, it was on loan to First Leeds one summer holidays, one August bank holiday, to operate the shuttle service to and from the Leeds Festival. So it was in the centre of Leeds, just waiting to go round to the loading stand behind the Leeds Atlantean in the Leeds CityLink livery. So despite the Titan fiasco, they didn't quite eschew Leyland completely. In 1984, they took delivery of this bus, the only Leyland National that KHCT ever operated, a Leyland National 2, a very late one as well, very late in the production cycle. But this was 60 B60 WKH. When new, it was in the Kingstonian coach livery, and it carried the fleet name Handy Rider. As you can probably just about see, it had a second door, a hinged door halfway down the near side. And in there was a wheelchair lift. It only had, I think, 22 seats when it was new. I'll just correct myself. It was new in January 1985, and it had 24 seats when it was delivered. It's operated special services for wheelchair users and other disabled passengers. You've got to remember, in the 80s, everything was step entrance. You couldn't just roll on and roll off as you can now. So they operated special services. They introduced them in 1985 in Hull. And it basically ran a cycle. I think it was Monday to Friday. It went to certain areas on certain days. I don't have the timetable, but, you know, for example, it would go to Branshome on Monday. It might do Orchard Park on Tuesday, etc. So it would go into certain areas, and if you wanted to ride on it, you know, wheelchair user, other disabled person who couldn't use a normal bus service, you rang up and you booked a slot on it, and then it came as close as it could get to your house, picked you up. Usually it went into town. I think on some services it went onto the Branshome Centre, the shopping centre there, or to the out-of-town supermarkets. But yeah, it seems a weird concept now in 2023 when I record this video, that you would run special services for wheelchair users. That's what they did. And it did until the end of the 90s, when low-floor buses started to enter service in Hull. This is in later life in Stagecoach ownership. They painted it all over white, as you can see. Eventually, when it became redundant, when low-floor buses became more widespread, it was withdrawn. It finished up with Batley and District, a short-lived operator in West Yorkshire. Got a backdrop of East Yorkshire vehicles. You've got a Bristol VR there in the sort of 1995 maroon and cream livery. One behind it in the former red and grey. You've got an Olympian in the old blue livery that was used for buses on the Long Hill route, the 56. There's a Stagecoach minibus just shooting across there in corporate livery. And you've got one of the C-registered Dominators just loading up at the stop just here. It's the former 124 C124 CAT, which was renumbered 224 by this stage. That was quite a late survivor of its batch. I think it was withdrawn in 2000, and it passed to Northern Blue. So after the Dominators, KHCT bought some Scanias. They bought some single deckers. Again, there were some photos of that in part 2. And then they went on to buying some double deckers. They were strange buses. They were N113 double deckers, which were quite common at the time. But KHCTs were long wheelbase, as you can see. Most of the ones that were delivered to other people were standard wheelbase. But these were long wheelbase. They had the normal East Lancashire body on the sides and the rear of the period, but they fitted them with the Alexander R-type copy front, or the East Lancs E-type, as it was known. So it was quite a strange hybrid. As you can just make out through the driver's window there, they had the 3 Crowns maquette, so they had to be reupholstered at some point. This is 801G801JRH. It was new in September 1989, and this is a photo in Hull coach station, as it was always referred to, the bus station in other words. So when it was quite new, loading on the 41 for Greatfield via Preston Road. Behind it you've got an Iveco minibus and an Atlantean, another Atlantean off to the side there. I've actually got 3 photographs of this bus in different phases of its life. So this is when it was fairly new. Here it is in Cleveland Transit livery in about 1997 under Stagecoach ownership. It would have been reseated by this point, or reupholstered, you can't really tell in this shot. I think they also rid them of the carpet. When they were new, they had carpet on the sides and the ceiling. Unfortunately, East Lancashire bodies of the period tended to leak, so water came in and collected in the carpet, and it started to smell really, really fusty. As you can see, it's received day-glow blind rails as well. So this was withdrawn in April 1999 from Stagecoach Hull. It was sold after a few months later on in 1999 to Houston Ram, who I've already talked about, with 157. It became part of the Coachmasters school bus operation. It passed with the Coachmasters to First Manchester in December 2000. And it was another one to be loaned to First Leeds for the shuttle service for the Leeds Festival. There it is, looking a little bit sorry for itself in yellow school bus livery. It later came to Leeds very briefly in about 2004. A few of them were transferred from Manchester to Leeds. They were meant to be school buses, but they did go out in normal service for a little bit. But it didn't last very long. They were withdrawn. A large batch of Wright Eclipse Gemini bodied Volvo B7TLs entered service and just saw them all off. So yeah, by this time it was 30249 in the first national numbering system. A couple more of the Scanias, this time in the Stagecoach era in corporate livery. This is 804G, 804JRH on Holderness Road, just near the junction with Morrell Street. And this was taken in September 1998. And in October 1997 you've got 809H, 809WKH from the second batch of the Scanias, inbound at Monument Bridge in Hull City Centre on an 8 from Bransholm. As you can see, most of the bus is in an advertising livery for Safer Sex starts here. That was for sexual health clinics. I believe 2 buses actually carried that livery at various points. I did mention the Iveco minibuses at the start of the programme, just a few photos of those. This is 601 in Hull bus station in the parking area just next to it. As you can see, by this point it had been resurfaced, or certainly this part of it had. This was taken in 1990. Got my dad just walking away from the camera there on the right hand side. And the CityLink Atlantean behind. As I said, when they were new, some of these were allocated to Cottingham Road Garage for the service from there to Bransholm, and also the Bransholm Estate Service, I think numbered 35 and 36. The rest of them were at the Ferronsway Garage, or Central Garage as KHCT referred to it. And they ran on the 29 to Bilton Grange, which this one's on, the 39 to Hawthorne Avenue. And they also ran for a bit on the 37 and 38 to Bricknell Avenue. But they weren't really big enough for the loads on there, so they were replaced at first with Leyland Leopards. And then later on with the Scania single-deckers. So they were marketed as Royals in a rather nice all-over maroon livery with gold lining. They had 25 seats, they had high back seats, they were designed with private hires in mind as well as normal service. The legroom on them was absolutely appalling, to be honest. You know, I was probably about 10 when I first got on one, and even then I struggled to fit into the seat. So yeah, they wouldn't have been comfortable on private hire. I don't think they were that popular. But they did have luggage boots to hold the luggage of anybody who happened to hire them. 602 that's on the right here was down-seated to 18 for a while for a shuttle service to Humberside Airport. But that didn't last very long. It had the seats refitted when the service finished, back to 25 seats. They were all named as well when they were new. 601 was King Alfred, 602 was King Canute. So they were named after monarchs to fit in with the royal name. And there's 604D, 604 MKH. The blind showing the route C2, which I think was the Marina Mini. It went up to the Marina, just near Hull City Centre. You can see the sign in the background for the bus garage. It said on it Ferronsway Depot, but it was always known to KHCT as Central Depot, or Central Garage. And again, 2 CityLink Atlanteans in the background. This is from 1990 as well. It's from the period when they tried to do a slightly better coach departure point. The coaches previously had gone from a corner of the muck, so it was really badly surfaced, it was uneven, puddles formed when it rained. It wasn't really fitting, so they paved over part of it and built a proper departure point, as you can see on the right, with some porter cabin based buildings, but there was a cafe, there was a waiting room, so it made it a little bit more civilised for coach passengers. 604 that we just seen was King Stephen when it was new. This is 606 D606 MKH, which was King Harold. See another CityLink Atlantean just peeping into the side there. So that was C5, which was 286 in the main fleet, WRH 286J, and a lovely backdrop of KHCT Atlanteans in the Hull Azure and white livery with maroon wheels, one Dennis Dominator in the background as well. Absolutely gorgeous, that's what it's all about. Anybody who remembers KHCT remember scenes like that every single day. I do wish we could time travel back and see them all again. And just some random shots to finish off. Another CityLink Atlantean in the background of this one. This shows some of the competition that KHCT would have faced. This is a Metro City Bus Bristol VR. It's SRP 818N, which was from United Counties and still carried their livery. When Stagecoach took over, they wasted no time in getting some new buses in. As I said, they were contracted to use the old blue livery for 2 years after they took over, so the buses at first were delivered in that livery. This is a Volvo B10M with Northern Counties body, 711 M711 KRH. They also got 3 Volvo Olympians, 817, 818, 819. This is 817 M817 KRH. An advert for the Princess Quay Shopping Centre. It's had its front repainted into the corporate Stagecoach livery. It's a quick shot of the early Stagecoach days. You've got 3 Dennis Dominators from 3 different batches. It's 224 again there, the former 124C, 124CAT. Got 233 E133 SAT, and then across on the right hand side 249 F149 BKH, so formerly 133 and 149 in the old numbering scheme. In among them is 800 C100 HSJ. That was a Scania that was brought down from Stagecoach West Scotland. It had passed to them when they took over A1 service, and Stagecoach tried to concentrate vehicles of the same chassis type at one particular depot. So obviously Hull had the Scanias that we've seen. They had the single deckers 701 to 706, and they also had 801 to 816, the double deckers that we've seen photos of. So they brought 800 down to operate alongside them because the depot had experience of Scanias. It was one of them buses that always seemed to turn up. I know if you've ever taken bus numbers or tried to photograph a particular bus, there are some that never seem to appear, and there are other ones that appear every single time you go out, and 800 was one of those. Every time you thought about going anywhere near the middle of Hull, it was there. I'm going to finish off in the early 2000s with another 3 shots. This one is an X5 Scottish coach K577 DFS, which was working from Hull Garage. In the late 90s, they brought in the service 909, which ran from Hull or Grimsby through Scunthorpe to Doncaster, Meadowhall and Sheffield. It was quite a success. The way it operated, every hour a bus would leave Hull for Sheffield and one would leave Grimsby for Sheffield. On the balancing half hour, another bus would leave Hull for Grimsby or vice versa. And then at Barnaby Top, the various vehicles would interchange, so you could get from Hull to Sheffield or Hull to Grimsby, or Grimsby to Sheffield and Grimsby to Hull every half hour basically by changing buses. This is in the early 2000s Beach Ball livery, and it's in Grimsby bus station just on its way back to Hull. Further to the point about concentrating buses with the same chassis at the same depot, because Hull was still operating some of the Dennis Dominators, they moved across the ones that have been taken over from Grimsby, Cleethorpes Transport, and this is the former Grimsby 79G 79 VFW working in Hull in around 2003, I think it was, as 15079 in the Stagecoach National Numbering Scheme. And just to round off, taken about the same time, you can see the muck, as it used to be known as, the parking area next to the bus station, with some very non-KHCT buses. However, you will notice that the KHCT sign is still on the fence, just defiantly there. I'm guessing it was demolished along with the rest of the bus station when the new one was built. This is shortly before the old one closed down. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the look at KHCT buses. As I say, I have got some slides that I need to get printed out, and then I will do one, maybe two more of these programmes to make a bit of a series. They will concentrate more on the council-owned era. There's a few Cleveland Transit ones from there, but most of them are the council-owned era, sort of the 80s, thereabouts. So please join me for that. Again, I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.